Hey there. I'm excited to announce this to you today. This is what you've been waiting for in your spiritual quest. This is something I've wanted to do for a long time, and I'm finally ready to announce it that it's ready to go. It's the Grief to Growth Community Circle. Now, this is a sanctuary where like-minded souls are united in their journey through grief and towards personal transformation. It's more than just a place. It's a beginning. It's a commitment to growth and understanding. Here you're finding not just a community, but you're entering a circle of trust and depth. You're going to engage with interactive coursework. You'll dive into exclusive podcast episodes and partake in discussions that illuminate the path from mourning to empowerment. This is a realm where every question is honored and every individual's journey is validated. To be part of this exclusive circle, visit us at grieftogrowth.com/community or look for the chat icon at the bottom of every page on the main website. Remember that entry is a privilege because I want to ensure that every member is as dedicated and genuine as you are. You must apply to join, but the journey within is worth every step. So go ahead and join us today. Check it out, grieftogrowth.com/community, and I look forward to seeing you there.
Hi there. Welcome to Grief to Growth Podcast. Your host is Brian Smith, spiritual seeker, best-selling author, grief survivor, and life coach. Brian believes that the worst tragedies of life provide the greatest opportunity for growth. Brian says he was planted, not buried, and he is here to help you grow where you've been planted by the difficulties in life. In each episode, Brian and his guests will share what has helped them to survive and thrive. It is his sincere hope this episode helps you today.
Hey, everybody. This is a special interview with my friend Srini Chandra. Srini and I have been friends for a long time. We had a lot to talk about. This interview went for a couple of hours. I know most people don't like 2-hour-long interviews, so I'm going to break this up into at least 2 parts. You can break it up as many parts as you want to. So this is part 1. So go ahead and watch part 1. Then after you've watched part 1, I'm going to publish part 2 the next week. If you happen to be listening to this recorded, you can watch part 2 right afterwards. But we have a very far-ranging discussion about the nature of reality, about science versus religion and philosophy, about materialism, and about a number of other subjects. So hope you find it as fascinating as I do. Go ahead and watch part 1 now and come back and watch part 2 later. Thanks. Hey, everybody. This is Brian Smith back with another episode of Grief to Growth. And today I've got with me my friend Srini Chandra. And I hate to say this, I feel like such an American. I can't even pronounce your last name. I've known you for like 9 years. So say your full name for me, Srini.
Sure. It's if break it into 2 parts, it's not as bad as it looks. Chandra is the easy part. Sekharan. Or you can think of it as shake and run, shake, run. It's Chandra Sekharan.
Okay. And your first name is longer than Srini also. What's your first name?
My first name, the full first name is Srinivasan.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Srinivasan.
Yeah, I feel like such an American. It's terrible. I need to learn how to say your name, but we're going to call you Srini for the purpose of the day. But I've been friends with Srini. I was looking it up the other day. I guess it's been like 9 years. And we met. Srini wrote an excellent book. I love this book. It's called 3 Lives in Search of Bliss. And he sent the book to me to review, and I did. I'd never heard of Srini, and it's a short book. I think it's about 150 pages. It's one of the best books I've ever read. I've read it again over this week. I've read it like 3 or 4 times. So I'm going to talk about the book also as we have this conversation. But the reason I'm having Srini on today, Srini is one of the wisest people that I know. He's one of the most compassionate people that I know. We've been friends on Facebook for a long time. He keeps me grounded. He's a very well-rounded person. I'm going to let Srini tell his story as to how he got to where he is in terms of his background. But we want to talk about today is the nature of, we were going to tie this to nature of belief, but I think I want to change it. I want to call it the nature of reality, because belief is important, but what we believe, I think we kind of know. We want to help people understand how to get to that point. So, we're going to break this down in a few parts. I don't know how it's going to go. We've kind of laid it out. First thing we want to do is introduce you guys to Srini and let Srini tell his story and who he is. And then we're going to talk about like Eastern religion versus Western religion. We're going to go over real quickly Islam and Judaism and Christianity as far as we know it. And then we're going to talk about, what is spirituality? How do we know we're being spiritual? What's the nature of truth? We're going to talk about things like karma and rebirth. Srini was raised Hindu, so he can shed some light on that for us, because I think we in the West have a lot of misunderstandings about that. We're going to talk about what is the meaning of death. What is death really a thing? Where do we find common ground in all these things and all these different faith traditions? And then we're going to talk about where we find common ground between faith, as we call it, faith, I put in quotes, and science, and the nature of reality. And so that's kind of our very ambitious agenda. We'll see how it goes. But Srini, I've done a lot of talking. I want to say thank you and welcome to Grief to Growth.
Thank you, Brian. I want to thank you for this opportunity. I listen to your podcast regularly. This is I'm really honored to be. I think it's great quality stuff, work that you do, and I'm happy to be here. To tell folks a little bit about myself and not take too much time doing so. I was born in India, on the southern part of India on the East Coast, in a town called Chennai. It's actually not a town; it's a metropolis, major metropolis, very large city called Chennai. And as you pointed out, I was born in a Hindu family. My earliest memories are, we had a large extended family growing up among the folks. My memories of my grandparents are, very vivid till this day. I went to school in Chennai, early kindergarten to high school. And I happened to study in India. We call them convent schools. They are schools run by Christian missionaries. So a big part of my formative experience was going through an education system, a school like that. And they were some of the kindest people I've known. And once I graduated high school, I joined college in India. And I studied engineering, like every good Indian does or tries to do.
Yeah.
And then we are talking late 80s at this point. And at that point, the thing to do was to seek the land of opportunity, the land of milk and honey, the United States of America. So it seemed very obvious at that point that I should head to the States. And so I applied for admission into Ohio State University. I came to Columbus, Ohio. Very proud Buckeye till this day. And, got my master's in engineering, worked for a few years, went back to school. Don't want to regurgitate my resume, but long story short, I spent more than 25 years at this point in the technology industry. And that's been an interesting experience because technology sort of shapes the way you look at life. A lot of things that we consider impossible become possible. And then you start thinking there are other possibilities to life too. So it sort of spills over into your personal domain. That's been a good experience. Personal front, married. I have 2 daughters. They are grown now, to my regret. Both one of them is in college. The other just started her job. And at some point, I guess we will talk about it. When they were born, that was a formative experience for me, becoming a dad. The circumstances under which they were born. There are some of these events that have shaped the way I've looked at life. I like to describe myself very simply as a seeker. I'm not anywhere close to being enlightened. I'm definitely on the path. I can feel it. I can feel that what I'm doing is working at some level. I've become very conscious of what I do and what I say, and my outlook towards life. And it's been an effort, and definitely I can claim some credit for the effort, but we will see. Time will tell where this leads me.
Yeah, well, as I said earlier, you are one of the most grounded people I know, and you actually talk me down a lot of times. So on Facebook, so I appreciate that. And as I got to know you, last week we kind of got together and we talked a little bit before we did this, and I got to know more of your story about your background, which I think is fascinating. Because as I read your book, 3 Lives in Search of Bliss, I love how you wove your knowledge of Christianity and Islam and Hinduism all into the same fabric of that book. And so your background, you did go to this Christian school, but you were raised in a Hindu family, right. And they never really tried to convert you to Christianity. They just taught you about it. So you've got a deep understanding of all these faiths and how they intersect.
That's true. That's true. They did also, I would say, they were gracious enough to accommodate some inconvenient questions. As a 10-year-old, 15-year-old, as I went through Bible studies in school, I would ask some questions, and And I'm happy to say they were very patient with some of these questions. I like to think that as a formative experience as well. I mean, all these seeds, I realize in hindsight, all these seeds are planted by somebody or the other, whether it's a grandparent or a parent or a friend or a teacher. And then they just grow, and, without your knowledge. And one fine day, and you're like, wait a minute, this plant was right there in front of me, and I haven't noticed it. And so it's a beautiful thing when that happens.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey there, something I want to tell you about today. My podcast platform, Buzzsprout, has recently made it easier for me to allow you to support me financially. Go to www.grieftogrowth.com/subscribe. That's grief2growth.com/subscribe. And once you're there, you can sign up to support me financially. Now, you can do it for as little as $3 a month, or of course, as much as you'd like. If you do that, you'll get access to bonus episodes, and you'll see those in the regular feed. They'll have a lock on them. But when you become a subscriber, you'll actually get access to your own private feed, and you'll be able to listen to the regular podcast along with the bonus podcast for the subscribers. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for sharing the podcast. And I want to thank those of you who support me financially. Have a great day, and on to the episode. It is. As we get that perspective, as we get older, we can see and how these seeds are planted. And that's one of the things I try to make people conscious of now, especially people who have children, right, that you're planting these seeds, whether you know it or not, and they're going to grow into some sort of tree at some point. Yes. So you had this formative experience of the religious background, the training in Christianity, the Hindu family. And then you were telling me your daughters come along. And so tell me how that shaped your life.
Yes, that I believe was in some sense an inflection point in my life. Mm-hmm. We're talking late 90s. My first daughter was born. And when she was born 2 months early. She was a preemie, as they call it. And I remember driving home from work. I was in the supermarket, and my wife called me, and she said, "I think they're having the baby." And I said, "What?" The baby isn't due until 2 months later. So the next thing we're driving towards the hospital, and 3 hours later she was born. And the startling thing about that was, the first time dad, it was a bit traumatic, to be honest with you, being there and watching the baby be born for a few seconds there. When I saw her, she looked perfectly healthy, fine baby, except she was tiny. I think, she was like half the weight that babies are normally, born at. And, but she looked like I had not seen a newborn baby before. And at that juncture, to me, she looked fine. And then they took her to the intensive care. And I remember the words of the nurse when they took her off to the intensive care. My wife was anxious, and I was standing outside in the corridor, and the nurse turned to me and says, "Son, take it one day at a time." And I had no idea what she meant. I thought, what is she talking about? Everything looks fine to me. Mm-hmm. But apparently the history of preemies is like, you can't tell, things can go up and down. And that's, I guess she was trying to be nice and kind and, alert me. The thing about that experience was, at that point I was working in the technology industry. I was running a major product line, and I was, I felt like I was in control of my life, and things were going great. And suddenly something like this happens. And I at that moment I realized, not in that time frame, I realized that we don't really have control over the things that we care about, that are truly important to us. I had every bit of control over, how I was going to launch this product, who was going to buy it, what was going to go into it, all these details. It gave me the sense of power over the world. Mm. But then I had absolutely no control over the trajectory my daughter's life was going to take. It struck me, it like somebody was lowering the boom on me. I remember sitting in the parking lot on a call with some of my colleagues and thinking, what is going on here? Hmm. And it sparked a journey. I started thinking, there is a lot more to life than what I'm making it out to be. And so it's not like I completely abandoned, my career, and I felt those are important, but I felt there's something more here. So it started a journey of just simply knowing what people have said, I felt completely ill-equipped to make up my own, theories. I said, let me start with what, other people have said.
Mm-hmm.
So I reread the Bible, which I had studied in high school. I reread some of the scriptures my grandfather had taught me. I read the Quran. I haven't read a whole lot of Judaism, and I remember speaking to a couple of Jewish friends, who talked to me about their religion. And what is it, right? What is going on? So that journey started. I think I would say that. And when my second daughter was born, same thing happened. 3 years later, she was born 2 months early. I was a little more prepared. I mean, my wife and I were a little more prepared.
Yeah.
But that was I would say that was a good, in hindsight, a good moment in life. Something that could have been not necessarily good.
It's interesting as you're telling that, I'm thinking, we have these formative moments in life. And for most of us, it seems like it takes trauma to wake us up. It takes a cancer diagnosis or death or something like that, but it doesn't have to. It can take a moment like a daughter being born. And my life changed when my daughter was born, just to kind of echo what you said. I remember them giving me this baby to leave the hospital. And I'm like, where's the instruction manual? And I went to put her in the car, and I was putting the car seat in backwards because they have to face backwards at first. And, I knew it, but I was just so nervous. And my wife and I get home and we look at her, we're like, they don't just take this baby home. What are we going to do with this baby for the next, number of years?
Right.
And for me, I was raised as a Christian, and I was raised with this God who was angry. And I was told about original sin, and I was told about, hell and separation and damnation and all that stuff. And I remember I never liked it. I always pushed back against it. It never made any sense to me. But when my daughter was born, I looked at her and I said, they told me that God loves me more than I could ever love anybody, even more than I love my daughter. And I said, if that's true, then the God they told me about is a lie. Mm-hmm. That God cannot exist, because I could never condemn my daughter, not even for a moment, let alone for an eternity. Mm-hmm. So those moments, that's something we have in common, that thing when we have that baby and we bring them home and we look at them and we know that love, but also the awesome, just tremendous fear, because we know that it's out of our control.
Absolutely.
That child walking around the world, the most important thing to us is the one thing that we have no control over.
Mm-hmm. The health of our loved ones, the health of our own selves is possibly the greatest wealth that we can have.
Yeah.
And we don't have any control over it. And I think that's a very humbling thought.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit about who you and I are. We'll kind of weave that in as we go through it. So let's talk about Eastern wisdom. You've got a YouTube channel where you do some basic Eastern wisdom, and I've been following it, and I've loved it, and I've learned a lot about it. So let's just kind of lay a foundation. Let's take about 10 minutes or so and go through just a real general outline.
Sure. Sounds good. I had prepared some notes to sort of kick this off. And there are, I would say, 5 major religions today in the world, and a sixth one that is much smaller. Possibly people haven't heard of it. They are Judaism, Christianity, and Islam on one side. And then we have Buddhism, Hinduism, and there's a third one called Jainism in India. People outside of India may or may not have heard of it, but it's very much an ancient faith practiced very diligently by a large number of people. When we look at this, and there are several other faiths, I don't mean to discount any of them, but these are what I would consider like the big religions of the world. There are, creeds and beliefs in China, which aren't quite religious in nature. So we will leave those aside for the moment. If you look at these 6, the pattern here is like, you see 2 broad highways in religion. And these are, when we look at Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, they were born in the Middle East. And the other 3 were born in India. And so there's this group of people a few thousand years back. They started some things. And it's interesting to see the paths they took. So I look at as 2 broad highways in religion. The first highway is a God-oriented approach. And the people in the Middle East, took that approach. And the most dominant question for them was, there is a God, there is a higher being, and what is this God? What is the nature of this God? And how do I reach this God? I mean, those were the questions. It's not to say that they were not introspective, but they spent a large amount of their time figuring these questions out. And from these questions came Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. I look at them as very God-centric faiths. On the East, at roughly around the same time, we are talking about 500, 600 BC, and Judaism, some of the parts of the Old Testament are written. Judaism is happening in the Middle East. Roughly around the same time, you have the philosophers in India. The Buddha shows up around 600 BC to give folks a rough sense of the time frame. Around this time, there's a completely different attitude in India. The attitude is, yes, there is also this belief in God in the land at the moment, but the philosophers say, wait, there is something called a God. I can sort of sense it, but I have no definitive proof for such a being. And I'm finding it really hard to discover this being. I don't see any evidence of that person or thing in this world. And they said the only thing I know for a fact is that I exist. And I have this being, and I exist, and there is something I'm doing, and there is some experience that I'm having. Let me explore this experience. So this I call the self-oriented approach, the sort of the examination of the self. And when we look at Buddhism, the Buddha or the Jainism, it was founded by a sage called Mahavira. People in India are familiar with Mahavira. So these two folks, they were introspective philosophers. So they said, who am I? That was the question they asked. Am I the mind? Am I the body? And, quickly they started eliminating possibilities, and they came to a certain truth about the nature of the self, that the self does not exist. It's a big statement to make. And so those are the two religions that, focused on the self-oriented approach. And they largely discounted God in the scheme of things. They said, go on this path, see where it takes you. You will get all the answers. And then on the other side, you had folks saying, just believe in God. You will find all the answers. And both of them were right. And then you have Hinduism, which is the granddaddy of them all, at least in India. And the Hindu philosophers said and asked the same questions. I think what is unique about Hinduism is it has theistic traditions. There is a very strong belief in God, like monotheism, like Judaism and Christianity and Islam. There is also a strong streak of inner exploration, leading to what we call monism or non-dualism. There is this formless, indescribable entity, being, and that is described as God. There's a parallel stream of thought. So Hinduism is unique in the way it sort of marries the ideas of a material, describable, tangible God. God looks like us, like the God has a face and a body and legs. That's the one description of God, and there is this other part that says the God is simply an indescribable, being. And the language is, strikingly similar when you compare, some of the descriptions of God in Judaism, in Islam, with some of the language in the ancient Indian literature about this formless God. You can see that they seem to have had similar experiences in their explorations. So that is to give a context of how these are set up. If you look specifically at Buddhism, I think Buddhism and Hinduism are possibly the most influential streams of thought today. And so when you look at Buddha, right, I think it's nice to understand the context in which Buddha came. The Buddha comes into India at a time when there are two extremely strong and competing forces in play. One is this materialistic lifestyle. Believe it or not, we're talking 600 BC. They were this strong materialist group. And these folks said, you guys are overanalyzing things. There is nothing to it. When we die, the lights go out and that's all there is to it. Somehow, somewhere, life started. And the only goal of life is the pursuit of pleasure. They were hedonists. And so there was this thing, and there were a lot of takers, as you can understand, for that movement at that time. And India was a prosperous country at that time. So there's all these things sort of play into it. And then on the other side, you have these philosophers in India who said the body and the mind are not the ultimate realities. There's something beyond. And to prove that, they just subjected the body to the extreme and severe, hardships. So you would have these guys going off into mountains, sitting in caves and, starving themselves and So these were the two options. And the story of how Buddha got started on his journey, I think everybody knows. He's born a prince, and he looks around and he sees suffering, and he says, I need to find out what's going on. And he leaves his house and he goes. And he does not like the materialist approach. He's very clearly, because that's the world he comes from. Mm-hmm. And he said, that's not it. And I'm going to go with the yogis, as we call them, the guys who are in the caves. And so he follows them around and subjects himself with the greatest, austerity. There is this description of Buddha where his stomach is so thin that you can see his spine through, from his front. And then he, says, no, this is not it either. This is, it does not take him anywhere.
Yeah.
So he chooses this thing called the middle path.
Yeah.
But he said, it can't be that, it can't be this, it's got to be something moderate. The interesting thing about Buddhism is it's a very serious religion, in my opinion. I think it's possibly the most serious one out of them all. Mm-hmm. The middle path of Buddha is not quite moderate, it's quite severe in modern context. Back then, probably it was the middle path. So the Buddha looks at everything. He says, there are these people who talk about God, and then he comes up with this middle path where he simply describes the world as a interconnected network of realities. Now there is something called matter, and there is something called consciousness, and these two things are reacting, connected, mm-hmm. and they lead to something called this creation, right? And he said that is all there is to it. There is nothing more. Mm-hmm. And so he prescribes, and I think the most profound observation of Buddha, the reason I say Buddhism is very serious, is it's the first statement that the Buddha makes after he comes out of his enlightened state, in a state of meditation. The first lecture that he gives to his one small group of people who gather around him is everything is suffering. All is suffering. He says this world fundamentally starts from a place of suffering. It's a strong statement to make, and you have to buy into that to be a practicing good Buddhist. And then it gets a lot better from there. It mm-hmm. seems dark and gloomy, but it's actually a religion of great joy. Mm-hmm. There is a story of the Buddha when he got out of his trance, and he decided to get some water to drink because his throat was parched. So he's walking through this field, and there's a little boy who's working in the field who sees the Buddha. And he turns to the Buddha, gives him some water, and he says, "What are you?" Many people in this world are asked, "Who are you?" The Buddha is, one of the few people who was asked, "What are you?" Because that's this shining, resplendent being. It is pure happiness. So it is a religion of great happiness. It's got a very positive message that suffering actually can be overcome. That is the teaching of the Buddha. And there is a lot of these techniques that he taught to folks. But it's not for the faint of heart, I think, in my opinion, right?
Yeah.
And then you have Hinduism, the Vedanta. I think the difference between the philosophy of Hinduism and Buddhism is not much. The Buddha said there is no ultimate reality. Mm-hmm. There is no such thing as a self. We come and we go, and we are destined to live in these cycles of life, growing old, dying, and then being reborn. So, how do we get out of this cycle? And he prescribed certain formulas. And he said that is what the one's goal must be, to attain this state of happiness. The Hindus went a little further. They said, something cannot come out of nothing. Clearly, there is a world around me, right? You may describe it as false or illusory, but it's there. So what is it that is causing that? Right. And they said the key to that is consciousness. Mm-hmm. So, we can talk more about that, but they said that is the ultimate reality. Yeah, there is the God. There is this being, and we call it God today. They called it Brahman back in the day in Sanskrit. And this being is the nature of this being is consciousness, and consciousness is something that activates this world.
I want to ask you a couple of questions as you're going through that. One is the Buddha. The Buddha was Hindu, right? Was it?
Yes.
So Hinduism predate. So I kind of think of Buddha almost as like Jesus coming into Judaism. And I don't think he meant to create a religion. He just said, this is the way I see things. And then there was a branch. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to make sure I understood that history. The other thing is you mentioned.
Can I comment on that for just a bit?
Yeah.
So it's an excellent observation that he made. The Buddha was born a Hindu, mm-hmm. and he was born a prince. He was well off when he was born. royal prince. So then he comes out, and his entire only goal of his like exploratory years are this suffering. He understands, Buddha has spoken extensively about the nature of suffering. And so he's, how do I get rid of this for myself? If I can do this for myself, maybe I can help others. So Buddha comes and directly challenges Hinduism. Hinduism at that point is a ritualistic religion. They've got this idea of Atman, or this eternal self, and they have Brahman and like their godhood, and there's these other gods that they worshipped. And Buddha comes and says, none of that is true. He rejected all of them. And to their credit, the people of the day, culturally, it was such that people, when they saw good ideas at that time, they simply took them up. They saw if they saw the idea was superior, it was the culture at that time to simply take the better idea, and all the older faiths would simply reconfigure themselves to be compatible with the new one. Yeah. And that is a beautiful thing, because the contrast between Buddha and Jesus Christ is is kind of, there is something there. When you look at that, Jesus Christ did the same thing. He came and directly challenged Judaism, and he was crucified for his troubles. So I think there's a lesson for us in the modern world. I'm not necessarily implying anything negative about Judaism, but it was the culture of the day, and there is a lesson there that when good ideas come along, it works out well for us to consider them and actually adapt ourselves, right?
We'll get back to Grief to Growth in just a few seconds. Did you know that Brian is an author and a life coach? If you're grieving or know someone who is grieving, his book, Grief to Growth, is a best-selling, easy-to-read book that might help you or someone you know. People work with Brian as a life coach to break through barriers and live their best lives. You can find out more about Brian and what he offers at www.grieftogrowth.com, www.growth.com, or text GROWTH, GROWTH, to 31996. If you'd like to support this podcast, visit www.patreon.com/grieftogrowth, www.patreon.com/GRIEF, to make a financial contribution. And now, back to Grief to Growth.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi there, I'm really excited to tell you about my latest ebook. It's 4 lessons that you can learn from the near-death experience without going through all the trouble of dying to learn them. I've been studying NDEs for several years now. I am completely convinced that not only are they 100% real, but that there's some very universal wisdom that we can get from the near-death experience. And I've distilled that down in this book into 4 short lessons. And I've also given you all the reasons why I believe that NDEs are absolutely real. So go to www.grieftogrowth.com/NDE lessons to pick it up for free. www.growth.com/NDE lessons. I hope you enjoy it.
And if it's a bad idea, we have nothing to worry about, because bad ideas we've seen in history just go away. Good ideas will never die, right?
Yeah.
So, it's I think it's something that we can take comfort from.
I love that. I love that observation. The other question I had for you about Hinduism, I studied it a little bit, and so Brahman should we consider Brahman a being, or I view Brahman as almost just a potential or what things come out of. But do the Hindus view him as a being?
No.
Okay, that's
Brahman is not even a concept. So the literature says Brahman is something that cannot be described.
Right.
If there is something that can be described by language, by definition, it can be objectified. I call a flower because there is an object. I'm a subject. I'm an observer. I can see something. And so Brahman does not fall into any of those categories. Brahman does not have a name or a form. Okay. So the easiest way to, I guess, understand Brahman is we have this concept of fields in physics, right? Like you said, right? So in quantum mechanics, you have this field, and something comes out of this field, a particle, like an electron, right? So Brahman is this field, and the attributes of the Brahman are no attributes. As in, if you take everything in the world and put it all in one place, the good is going to mix with the bad, and there's going to be, what do you call something that is perfectly good and perfectly bad. And, you meld them, there's nothing.
Mm-hmm.
They just negate each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
So all the opposites, when they come together, there is nothing in some sense, like in terms of attributes.
Mm-hmm.
But there is something, that one thing. So the Hindus call it, there is this one thing. It's a substratum. It is the ground on which reality exists.
Yes.
So Brahman is this thing or a field of possibilities. They liken it to an ocean.
Yeah.
There are waves on this ocean. So the nature of this Brahman are three attributes. One is existence. So Brahman does not exist. Brahman is existence itself.
Yes.
Brahman is not conscious. Brahman is consciousness itself. So maybe we can look at it as a field with some properties.
Yeah.
And even that does the whole thing disservice, to be honest.
I think it's such a brilliant observation that when we think about how ancient that is, and there's a Christian theologian, Paul Tillich, that called God the ground of all being, and and even science is we're kind of getting ahead. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit right here and talk about science, but science is starting to understand that there was this potential. I mean, one time we were told there was a singularity that everything came out of, which makes no sense because where the singularity come from, but there's this potential. And so as I was looking at that and I watched this beginning thing on Hinduism, I'm like, these guys knew this a long time ago, a very, very long time ago.
It's mind blowing.
Yeah.
You're talking several thousands of years old, ideas here. Some of these ideas are 10,000 years old because some of the Hindu scriptures are, they're passed on verbally. The written records are about 3,000-4,000 years old. And they were passed on for, several thousand years by word of mouth. And these were like cow herds or, they were like wandering around on the mountains of in Central Asia. And they found their way into India. And it's mind blowing to see that such an idea came about.
Yeah, and the other thing, and I want to make sure that I've got this correct because like I said, I don't know a lot about this, so this is good to ask you because my understanding is Brahman, this potential, this field, whatever, that's also Atman, that's all inside of all of us. So this idea that we and God are one and are the same is, again, that's a new concept for me, but that's something that Hindus have known for forever.
Yes. So this comes from a school of philosophy in Hinduism called Vedanta. And that is what my YouTube channel is about. And I feel like there are some very exhilarating truths there. I don't know what it's going to do for people practically. I don't think it's going to make somebody a better physicist or an engineer or marketing or whatever person, but there is some very goodness that comes out of sort of seeing the world a certain way. And that's what Vedanta does. And what the central teaching of Vedanta is that our true self is divine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The self is the word used is Atman. And divine part is Brahman. Atman equals Brahman is the equation in Vedanta. And why is it so? There's a long explanation for it. If you have time, we can get into it. But it essentially arises from saying that as beings, we experience this world only in our consciousness. That is the only reality that we have, that we know of. Which is to say, none of us have actually stepped into the world and verified it. When I see a flower, the flower doesn't physically enter my eye, or there is no merger of physical entities here. I see something and it creates an experience in my brain. We think it's the brain. And then it's in our consciousness. And so what is it that creates this experience is the question they asked. And they said, it's consciousness. And the way they categorized it in terms of the hierarchy, they said consciousness is the root. Everything else is an experience. Even your brain, your perception that you have a brain is an experience. So, so it's a very deep philosophy. So they said at the root of it is the consciousness that in yours, personal, whatever is causing your personal subjective experience, that is Atman. And where does this consciousness come from? It comes from this Brahman, which is the source of all consciousness. And the beauty of the punchline is it's all the same.
Yeah.
You and me and everything else, it's all being animated by the same, force or energy or whatever the word that we want to call it.
Yeah, there's a guy, and I think Bernardo Kastrup, who is a philosopher and a computer scientist, brilliant man. I mean, this guy's got PhDs in computer science and philosophy. But so he's got this idea of idealism. And so I was reading his books and studied that, and I interviewed him. I'm like, this is Hinduism. I mean, this is, and so the way he describes it is, and he has several metaphors, but one is like we're like ripples, in a stream. And so when a stream forms a whirlpool, that's kind of how we are. But we're still part of the stream. We can't be separated from it. We just have this self-reflective thing where we feel like we're separate. So you were saying, I don't know how this really impact people practically. I was talking with someone yesterday. This is the way I look at people now. And this person was saying, I feel separated from God. They've had a tragedy in their life. And I said, I feel separated. I feel disconnected. And I said, you feel disconnected. I understand that. That feeling is you're real. Feelings are always real, but you're not, because you can't be. Because I look at you and I look at her and I see God. And I'm like, and it's a blasphemous thing in Christianity to say that I'm God.
Yes.
But in Hinduism, it's just reality.
It is reality. So Hinduism, yes, it is not at all blasphemous to say that I am God in Hinduism. And it is not considered to be an inferior way of thinking to say that there is a God that is separate from me either. Mm-hmm. We are fine with everything. Mm-hmm. And there is this notion. So we are sort of getting into this nature of truth part that we want to talk about.
Yeah.
So there is this notion of truth in Eastern wisdom. I would attribute it to all of the Eastern religions, and I think we find that in the Middle Eastern religions too, but they are suppressed. That's all. I think they have been said. They have all been said by all people.
Yes.
It's just that what we gave play to over the years. The notion of truth is that we progress from one truth to another, and they are all true, even if they conflict with one another. It's sort of what Einstein said. Einstein said, genius is the ability to hold two conflicting beliefs in one's mind at the same time, right?
Yeah.
So it's very hard for us to wrap our minds around it, but that's what they said. So they said there is this truth. You believe in it today, and tomorrow you will discover another truth, and that truth will conflict with this, and both are true. But the moment you see a higher truth, the lower truth sort of dies.
Yeah.
But it is still true for the other person.
Yeah, they're kind of nested within each other. Yeah,
right. So then the journey becomes like the pursuit of the highest truth, and the highest truth is that of the Brahman, according to the Hindu philosophy. Mm-hmm. So then we have these lower truths, right? Karma, for example, is a good example. So we have all these truths that we do in order to transact and engage with the world. Yeah. We call them morals.
Yeah.
Right. And they are in the context of space and time. I'm in California, there is a certain truth, and there is, I'm in Ohio, maybe there's a different truth. I'm in India, Africa. Everybody, there's a context to truth, and they're all true. Yeah. That is the thing. So they describe them as sort of like steps on the ladder.
Yeah.
You climb up the ladder. Who's gonna say that the lowest step of the ladder is less important than the highest step? There is no such thing.
Right.
You cannot get to the next step without the one before it.
Yeah.
So beautiful. Would anybody want to have a ladder with just the top step? No. Right. And they're all equal. So there's, I think the attitude of looking at one as inferior or superior doesn't work, because they're all needed, right, for us to get somewhere.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So let's just step back a little bit, because we got really deep in the Eastern stuff, because I love it. But we're going to cover Judaism and Christianity and Islam just real quickly. Yes. So my background is Christianity, and the thing about all of these faiths, probably even Hinduism and Buddhism, they're different branches. So we're doing real high general overview. So if somebody says, "Well, that's not the way I was taught it," that's fine, because there's several thousand literally Christian denominations. But from a high level point of view, we have Judaism, the Abrahamic faiths, right? They all came from the same thing. They're all based on when the Jewish people became a people, and Abraham, and then the what we call the Old Testament as Christians, which is offensive. It's Hebrew scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures that are part of our Bible. Then we get the New Testament, and then you've got Islam that came and built even on that. And they're all based on this idea that they looked at the people around them and they said, we're not going to be like them. These people are pagans. They have multiple gods. We're going to worship the one God, and therefore there are no other gods. Don't have any other gods before me. This God we see develop from a angry, tribal, warlike God in Hebrew scriptures to Jesus comes along and gives us another version of God. And Muhammad comes along and gives us even a little bit, maybe more enlightened version of God. And I know that hurts some people's Western ears to think that Islam might be more developed than Christianity, but it did come later, and people are evolving. And there are some beautiful, beautiful aspects of Islam, which we can maybe talk about a little bit. But as you said at the beginning, our faiths are more like focused on God and the tribe. How do I fit into the tribe? Not so much reflective of internally. And as a young boy, when I was taught about the Eastern religions, I was taught, and we're all taught, stereotypes about other religions because they're trying to indoctrinate against it. So Buddhism is all navel gazing. It's all about yourself. It's all about, it's a very selfish religion. It's not about giving back to the world. It's about improving yourself and trying to escape, the world. So that's kind of the thing that we were given, because we're taught everybody around you is more important than you are. I mean, this is, as I taught in Sunday school, there was an acronym they told us: Jesus, others, and you. You serve Jesus first, then you serve others, and then maybe if there's anything left over, you take care of yourself. Okay. So that's just my real quick overview. So what are your thoughts on those three faiths?
The way I see it is there are pros and cons, right? So when you take the God-centric approach, which is what Christianity and Judaism and Islam do, personally speaking, the biggest challenge I have, and I think most people have, is we find it very hard to believe. It's not easy to believe in God. We like to think we believe in God. We pray, we chant, but there is this question in the back of our minds: is this really true, right? And we just can't seem to get rid of it. Most of us might spend our entire lifetime not being able to get rid of that doubt. It is not a lack of desire. It is there. It is sometimes it's due to the nature of our being. But there are some people who are very naturally inclined to do that, and they do that effortlessly. They do that. I've seen people. My parents are a good example of that. My wife is a good example. They effortlessly believe in God, and gives them great peace. And some of us don't have that capacity. The beauty of the God approach is it's very simple. You don't need to learn complicated stuff. You don't need philosophy. It's pure intent, belief in God, and it will take you to a state of peace. And I think that's the beauty of the approach. The self-oriented approach looks easier, but it's equally hard, because it requires a lot of discipline. You have to learn. You have to have teachers. They have to teach you stuff. You have to respect the teachers, and then you have to learn what they have told you, and you have to practice them. It's a long process. It's challenging, but the beauty of that approach is you don't have to believe in anything when you start, right? So I think I would say, if I compare the world religions, they are all there depending on what kind of a person we are. If we sort of understand, okay, this works for me or that doesn't work for me, it becomes a little easier for us. We don't have to necessarily all believe in God to start with.
Right.
And those who believe in God are not crazy people. So I think the understanding of that, when it comes, and then it becomes about what works for me. So I think that's the way I see it. I think there are these paths. And then you might jump from one to the other, because as you become a little more capable of doing certain things. I find myself, practicing faith a lot these days. It's just somehow I seem to have acquired some muscle and capacity to understand this being called God, and it gives me great happiness. There's no name or anything I attach to this thing, but there's the idea of divinity. It gives me great happiness. Right? Yeah,
I think that's great. I think it's a really good overview, and I think you're right. There's beauty in both, and they can both be true. There's so many paradoxes in our world, in our universe, and we're very much, again, Western philosophy, science has kind of taught us this. It's either or. One is right, the other is wrong. But it's interesting because we discovered, like, the nature of light, for example, is light a particle or a wave? Yes. It's both, and it depends on how you look at it.
Right.
So that's a concrete example of something in our world. And we would so when we say, well, it's got to be there is a God or there's not a God, it's one or the other. Well, no, it kind of depends on how you look at it. Right. And I was talking with the client yesterday, and she said, one of the things I want you to help me do is figure out, like, who my God is now. And I'm like, that could take the rest of our lives, because I don't know,
Right.
When people say to me, do you believe in God? I'm like, especially with atheists, I'm like, well, yes and no. Which God do you talk about? Oh, I'm talking about the big white guy on the throne that judges us and controls the world like a puppet master. I'm like, no, I don't believe in that God. Right. But do I believe in divinity? Do I believe in consciousness? Do I believe in Brahman? Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I mean, how could you not? How could you be here if you don't?
Yes, but it's a journey.
Mm-hmm.
There are not a lot of takers for Brahman either. There are a lot of takers for a God which is a tangible God.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody who created this world and with some purpose and intent and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
The way I sort of understood it is, I've seen questions on Reddit or like even on my YouTube channel, like how do I become a Hindu?
Mm-hmm.
And usually it's obviously not a Hindu who's asking this question. It's a Christian or somebody else.
Right.
And my belief on that, and I haven't expressed it publicly. My belief on that is you don't have to. You're born in a certain faith, like
Mm-hmm.
you're a Christian or a Muslim or Hindu or whatever, and you actually have the advantage of having sort of grown in a certain
Mm-hmm.
culture. Double down on it. Be a very sincere Christian, meaning like you don't have to listen to what the other Christians are telling you. You figure it out for yourself. If you double it down on it and you become a very good Christian, it will take you to wherever it will take you. It will either take you to the Buddha, it might leave you with Jesus, it might take you to the Brahman, whatever it is. Let the journey be. But we have to have a starting point. And practically speaking, the best starting point may be the one we are most familiar with. And all these truths are valid, so there's no need to, and if once we evolve and we see something that is better, you can marry all of these together. So, right?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting as you say that, because there was a time I thought about converting to Judaism, because I was raised in the church, and I'm like, this makes more sense to me. So I was thinking about converting. The thing about what you just said is like what a rabbi will tell you. If you go to him and say you want to convert, they'll say, don't. They will talk you out of it. They'll say, do not convert to Judaism. You don't need to. One of the things about the Christian faith, again, the particular sect that I was brought up in, is we had to bring people in because you had to be a Christian to be saved. Right. But with a faith like Hinduism or Judaism, where you don't have that requirement, you're like, just stay on the path you're on. Right. And for myself, I didn't intentionally ever leave Christianity, but I just kept getting so far away from what I was taught that I don't use that label anymore. And one of the earliest things for me just kind of came to me, I don't know, kind of intuitively, I guess, was when I die and go to heaven, I don't think I'm going to see God. Mm-hmm. And we have this image of there's going to be a guy on the throne. I'm like, I don't think there is a guy on the throne. It's just, to me. So when I heard about the idea of a Brahman, it was like, that makes more sense to me. I don't think there's a being to be seen. There's no ultimate being. There's not a throne room where God sits. That's just, yeah.
I agree. To me, Brahman makes complete sense, personally, right? When I see somebody worshiping Jesus Christ or Krishna or Allah, the way I see it is, all of us need some sort of a ritual or a discipline or some mechanism to sort of assure us that we are on the path. And if at the moment we feel like we don't need it and we are still somehow able to maintain a certain way of life, then we are good. Yeah. Until then, I think these are not necessarily, bad things. Like, no, not at all. These are lower truths, higher truths, whatever you want to call them. There are different types of truth, and it's it's one of the steps, the ladder. And so I agree with you that there are all these ideas of God, and I think the practical advice would be pick the one that appeals the most to you.
Yeah.
And just be very sincere about it. It's very hard to be sincere. I mean, I'm speaking from personal experience. I can talk a number of things. Push comes to shove. How does it show up in my life? Yeah. That is the thing. Belief has to convert into practice. And that is, if we focus on that part, the practice part, even if it's a lower belief or a wrong belief or whatever it is, it will lead to take us to a good place. Yeah, just the discipline will force us in the right direction. I think we have to trust that process, and if we trust the process, I think we will be okay. That's sort of what I'm in my opinion here.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you, and I don't, and it's interesting as as we talked earlier about how our lives, we have these formative things that come in our lives, and then we see a higher truth or different truth. It's like,
Right.
and it could blow our minds. I remember very vividly. I was a young Earth Christian. I believe that the Earth was 5,000 or 6,000 years old, and I'm a scientist, but and I ran into these guys, Ken Ham, and I can't remember the other guy's name, but the young Earth guys that did the Creation Museum that's not too far from here in Kentucky, and they were explaining how the Earth is only 6,000 years old. So I bought into the whole thing, and I'm out there preaching this whole thing. And then one day I read a book that explained how the book of Genesis was really talking more like epochs or ages, not days, and how the Earth was formed. And I remember looking up from that book, and the world just looked different to me. Everything was just like different. And God just became so much bigger, because I'm like, God didn't create the Earth in 6 days. That's a magic trick. God created the Earth in billions of years. That's patience. That shows how large, how big God is now, how patient and timeless. So the Earth became actually even more magical to me when I embraced that truth. But I can still read the book of Genesis and say, from a mythological level, there's a lot of wisdom in the book of Genesis when we can start to learn to read it that way.
I agree. And conversely, I would take issue with the atheists. When I look at militant atheists like Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens, I used to, be a very avid consumer of what I was very interested, because these guys are, smart people, and I felt like they cannot be ignored. And I think the biggest, I find the biggest issue I had with, I actually was a practicing atheist for some time. I tried that too. The issue I had with the whole theory of atheism and the coming out of the scientific context is it takes a very small data point, which is life on Earth. Life on Earth came about accidentally. It's the basis of evolutionary biology. And then one thing led to another. And based on that, it negates everything else, right? Like such as the existence of God. I might sound like I'm speaking like a revisionist Christian here, like defending the Christians here, but I'm not. But I think there is something to be said for a model in which something can happen locally in a certain way, which is all part of a grander creation, right? So it doesn't, in my mind, it doesn't necessarily disprove God.
Yeah.
And in fact, in this hierarchy of beliefs, I think that is literally the first step. I think in some sense, maybe perhaps the lowest truth in some sense, which is a lack of belief in God. It's sort of natural to sort of be there. But I think the moment we get into I've seen this in Hindu scriptures. It says, a man who worships a rock under a tree has moved one tiny step ahead of the man who doesn't believe in anything at all. I think there's some profundity there, and something to think about.
I think there is, but what's interesting, and we're going to talk about science and materialism in a little while, but throughout man's history, we've always had a belief in the divine. It's the idea of materialism, the idea of atheism, materialistic atheism, is a new idea. I mean, it's come about in the last couple hundred years. And I look at it as kind of like the fall of man. We became so proud. We became so enamored with ourselves and what we could discover that we said, we don't need God anymore. We can figure this all out on our own. And I think that was one of the things that led to our fall. Right. The scientific process itself is beautiful. And as you said, I mean, you're an engineer. We've created amazing things with science. We've made our lives so much better with science. But that whole thing started because people believed that there was a God who created an orderly universe, and we could discover God through studying his creation. That's where science actually came from.
Right. Yes. So yes, the way I look at science, it's a pretty modern construct, at least in its current form, right? The whole idea of what does science do? Science studies the world. The goal of science is to study the world in a very objective fashion, impersonal, objective fashion. They are in the business of collecting facts, and they conduct a number of experiments. And if they see a pattern, as the experiment gives the same result again and again and again, it becomes a fact. And that is in the context of the time frames that we have. We live for 70 years or 100 years or whatever it is that we live as human beings. In this time frame, we see something repeat again and again, it becomes a fact. Something could be a fact and repeat once in every 1,000 years. We're just not around to see it. It's a possibility.
Right.
But anyway, science defines itself in a certain way. And it is, I think, designed to be very practical and convenient for us. But it is in the business of studying impersonal, objective reality.
Right.
And it has also largely been in the business of studying the world, not ourselves.
Right.
We make observations of the world. And then that is the nature of science. And it's a beautiful thing because it has made life so much convenient for us. But I describe science as promissory materialism. Science does not give us all the answers today. How did this whole thing start? Science will say, give me another 100 years and I'll tell you.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Why am I conscious? Give me another 50 years and I'll tell you. So this is like promissory materialism. And on the other hand, you have promissory spiritualism, which is the religions. They say, if you do all these things, you will reach God. You will go to heaven. And it's always, everybody is talking about something in the future. It's never now. It's like you have to do all these things, be patient, and then you'll get somewhere.
Wow. Yeah.
These are the two approaches. And there has got to be a third approach that says, I should be able to figure this out or like do something that gives me some benefit right now.
Yeah.
Meaning, I do not have to die to reach heaven, or I do not have to die to be enlightened. I should be able to, avoid suffering like right now. And that is where I think we find the faiths like Buddhism and the Vedanta of Hinduism come in. What they say is, yeah, you can do that. You don't have to wait for anything.
Yeah, my biggest problem with science, and again, I'm a scientist, you're a scientist, I'm a chemical engineer, so I don't ever put down science. I put down scientism, or materialism. And my big, you talked about the idea of creation and we're an accident. That's one big problem. The biggest problem I have is they don't even know who they are. This guy, Daniel Dennett, says that consciousness is an illusion. And it's like consciousness is the only thing that's real. The only thing that we absolutely know for sure is that we're conscious. You and I don't even know if we're really sitting in these chairs. We feel like, but we don't know that. I just know I'm having the experience of sitting in the chair. That's the only thing I know. And these guys tie themselves up so much in knots that since they can't explain consciousness, they can't say what it is. They can't say where it came from because it makes no sense that as the universe just became more and more complex, it consciously magically appeared. So they say it doesn't exist. That's got to be the stupidest thing anybody's ever uttered.
Yeah.
All right. So that's the end of part 1. I hope you enjoyed it. Go ahead and watch part 2 whenever you feel ready to do that. And again, break it up as many parts as you want to. And thanks for listening. Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode. I want to make it really easy for you to reach me. So just send me a text to 31996 and simply text the word growth, GROWTH. In fact, you can right now just say, hey Siri, send a message to 31996. And when Siri asks you what you want to send, just say growth. You can do the same thing with OK Google. Thanks a lot. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for listening to Grief to Growth. Brian hopes that you find this episode helpful and will come back for future episodes. Brian's best-selling book, Grief to Growth, Planted Not Buried, is a great resource for anyone who is coping with grief or knows someone who is. If you enjoy the podcast and would like to support it, there are 3 things you can do to help. The first is to share the podcast with someone that you think it will help. The second is to go to iTunes, rate, and review the episode. The third way you can support the podcast is by becoming a patron. Head over to www.patreon.com/grief2growth. That's patreon.com/grief, the number 2, growth, and sign up to make a small monthly donation. Patrons get access to exclusive bonus content and knowledge that you are helping to spread the message of grief to growth. For more about Brian and Grief to Growth, visit www.grief2growth.com.
Hi there. I hope you enjoyed this latest episode of the podcast, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. What questions came up for you? What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? I invite you to visit us at grieftogrowth.circle.so. That's grief2growth.circle.so to continue the conversation with me and with other listeners. It's a space to sound off, to share reactions, and to go deeper into the topics from the show. I look forward to chatting more, and I hope to see you there.